But let's first of all introduce Esmeralda. Have I pronounced that right, Esmeralda?
That's correct.
Brilliant. Can you just give us a quick synopsis of what your background is, please?
Well, I'm head of Spanish and head of MFL at King's Ely, which is an independent school in Cambridgeshire. And as from September, I'm also going to be a digital lead for the whole school. And yes, and I've been teaching Spanish, a little bit of French at some point during the last 20 years.
And Jane, if I can introduce you next.
I'm head of modern languages at Down House. I've been there for about, 14 years, and I've been teaching for coming up for 20, well, I've just finished my 26th year, and I run this large department teaching French and some Spanish as well sometimes, and I've had a big part to play in my school's implementation of technology.
Helen, how are you this morning? And again, if we can have a little bit of background, would be helpful.
Well, I've been a member of a senior management team in a school for a long time, and I've recently stepped back, actually retired, but become actually now a part-time teacher in modern languages. But also importantly, I think, is that outside of school, I've always been very involved in the Association for Language Learning. So that way I've always had a big network, and even more so now, part of the network which Joe Dale, you're going to be introducing him, has instituted for modern language teachers, which is great to be part of.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And yes, so the mighty Joe Dale, not just Joe Dale. Joe, can you just give a quick synopsis, please? Because I know that you have a few hats, you're an independent consultant, but I think you're more than that, and certainly a globally recognised name these days in the MFL world.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rob. So yeah, so I'm a former languages teacher, former French teacher. I taught for 13 years, secondary school level for 3 years, and then middle school level for 10 years on the Isle of Wight, which is where I have been now for months and months and months. Also, now like an international languages consultant. I normally go around the world, but I've been doing lots and lots of webinars and what have you. I'm a member of the Association for Language Learning as well, and Helen and myself have been working tirelessly putting together the TILT webinars, the technology and language teaching webinars, which have been very well received. And we've done around 40, I think, so far. So it's people from the UK and international speakers. We've had people from North America, from Australia, from all over the world, which has been really exciting. And everyone working together as a type of global languages party, as one person described it.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. You guys are part of the MFL Twitterati. Put a hashtag in front of that, put that into search engines, see what comes up. It's huge. And I think what we want to try and get out of today is really looking at teaching and learning in the blended online environments, and particularly the kind of things that you've been doing in your MFL world that could translate to pretty much any other subject. Where do you see this notion of being an expert teacher? Because some teachers find that extremely difficult to be expert offline, but not expert online.
I think there's an issue around the word expert, certainly in the context of the MFL Twitterati. I think the whole point of the community is that everybody has their voice and everyone can share, and no one person is higher in the hierarchy than anybody else. And what we try to do within the webinars that we've been doing, and also as part of the wider community on Twitter and elsewhere, is to try and big up everyone and support everybody. And yes, we've been asking individual people to give webinars and what have you, because we know that they have expertise in certain areas. But the choices behind choosing those people is because of the fact that they can offer something which we know that lots and lots of people will find useful. And so it's about, I suppose my job in that has been pinpointing people who I feel will help with the general discussion and helping people either with the remote teaching ideas or a blended approach. So recently we've been having lots of ideas around how do we prepare for September.
I suppose that fosters a real collaborative approach.
Exactly.
Esmeralda, if you had any kind of observations over the last few months, what would you say has been the transition for people going on from what you've seen?
Well, I've been really, really impressed. What I've seen from a particular point of view from my school, I saw in my department, for example, people taking risks, which I had never seen before. And this is something very positive with the whole situation. And people that normally wouldn't have used IT so much, suddenly they were forced to use it and actually losing that fear and actually
trying
sharing.
to get people to do it for years and then suddenly bang.
Exactly, and there was there was a kind of fear, and suddenly it's like, actually it wasn't that difficult. And I think there's going to be a little bit of revolution. I want to think definitely a change in the way we do things for the best, because I think IT and the way we've been teaching can really support the way that we teach in the classroom at the same time. And then before it was just only a few experts that used to be around the country. And I love to see that there's been a lot of upskilling. From a national point of view, I've loved the generosity of what I've seen is a lot of generosity among people, among the teachers community, specifically my point of view, obviously from the MFL community, sharing resources, sharing ideas that people that you just could just pretty much pick up, change a little bit and use the next day. Sure. And I think that's never happened before.
I mean, from my perspective, what I've seen is a lot of good stuff, and I've got to be honest, there's a lot of bad stuff. And I think that tends to happen when lots of stuff is thrown into the melting pot. But what I think you've opened my eyes to is the notion that there's a lot of good stuff that isn't necessarily being showcased unless you have something like the MFL Twitterati. You have this collaborative movement where people can share and show. But I think there must be some things that people have struggled with. Jane, from a management perspective, and from a teaching perspective, what do you think people have struggled with? Because people have thrown themselves into it, but what do you think people have actually found most difficult?
Well, I suppose sometimes people find it difficult to marry good teaching methodology to using the technological tools. I mean, because there's been a necessity to use the tools, people haven't always, and this is where I felt, as from a middle manager point of view, where I felt I've been able to guide, people haven't always, they've seen the tool, well, that's a great tool, but they've not actually thought about the methodology and, why am I using that? What's the purpose? How is this going to enhance the teaching? And I think that is where I've been able to help and to get in. And that's what you see on Twitter as well, people guiding, and reminding that it's always not about technology, but it's about methodology. How is this going to improve my students' learning? How is it going to help them make progress? We're looking at the same things that we looked at before we're in this situation. Teacher presence, immediate feedback. How can we do that? How can we have peer interaction? How can we give them independence and flexibility, allow them to, pace themselves? Retrieval practice, just all those buzzwords that we always hear, space learning and quizzing. I think that's where some teachers have struggled. They've not thought about those key terms that they would use in their normal classroom.
And I think that would mirror what I've seen. There is some cracking stuff, but I think that almost a symptom of when people learn new stuff is they need to play and they need to try and try things out. But perhaps we're now moving into a phase where we can almost filter out the more of the playing and perhaps get a little bit more focused on the pedagogy, I suppose. Helen, your observations of the last few months, I was going to particularly focus on this notion that young people and young teachers theoretically are kind of into technology and they take it in their stride. But are they using a different kind of technology? Like they're on social media and such like, but I mean, I saw someone get on to a Zoom with their sixth formers, and it took them a while because the sixth formers were working out because why would they use Zoom? My question is, have you seen any, or are you aware of any kind of reluctance, not just over the last few months, but ever, in terms of people embracing the technology, not just assuming it's a young kids thing, but them kind of saying, well, that's not for me, kind of thing. And have you come across that, and have you found any ways of trying to ease them into it?
Actually, I thought your question was going to lead to, have I found that pupils have not wanted to embrace the technology? Because
right. Well, you can very much answer that as well, to be honest with you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's both.
Well, and the fact of the matter is that we're all at different stages, aren't we? And certainly, I mean, I've been around for, I thought, you're asking me that question particularly because, yes, I have been around quite a long time.
No, not at all.
And yet,
you said you were semi-retired. That was the only thing. So.
No, but in a way, it's correct to do that because sometimes
you look younger than Joe.
Older people to actually understand and embrace Sorry, I wasn't listening then because I was talking.
Sorry.
Sorry,
I do
Helen.
apologise. I interrupted.
You said something and I didn't hear it. Sorry.
I was making fun of Joe, but I will.
That's okay.
I'll probably edit that. Anyway, so yes, I apologise. Carry on.
But certainly, you asked about how I've seen that over time, really, and I've been, I suppose, promoting IT since 1998 when Ashcombe School became a language college.
Right. Yeah.
And my own feeling is that very often it's really to do with the nature of the person as to whether or not they embrace technology or not. It's nothing to do with age.
Sure.
And it is to do with risk taking, as you've said, and Esmeralda was saying that. It's also those of us who like playing, because I would take issue a little bit with the idea of playing not being pedagogy, because the best thing about pedagogy sometimes is when you think you're playing, but actually it is that you're learning. So the two don't necessarily go against each other. So it
I think that's a really good point about the actually enabling the play and the interplay, perhaps even between students. You know what it's like, well, I remember VCR videos, and you try to get the video to work in the classroom when you're teaching, especially as a PE teacher. We don't know much about video recorders and all that kind of stuff. So we'd go in the classroom and we'd be like, how do you get the video recorded? And the kids would come and help you. And some teachers are sort of embrace that and kind of go, hey, let's work this together and we play together. And some might feel that they have to be perfect on this stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, people wouldn't necessarily know that for the first 20 minutes before this, we were playing around trying to get things to work. And perhaps we all need to just breathe a little and allow that to happen, perhaps.
Yes, and I think we're all going to be talking from different situations in our school, because you were talking about at a national level how with what Joe's done and with what we've been doing as a community, we've been supporting each other. I mean, the absolute ideal, let's face it, is that you've got a school who is like that. And I think we're lucky that we're all in schools where that's happened, where really you've got a management approach which accepts that, when you're in school and you haven't got to use IT, well, you don't force people to use IT if their personality. Some of the best teachers I know use no technology because they are absolutely superb in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this situation has forced those people then to have to use it and to embrace it. And I haven't been surprised that people who perhaps normally don't use it have seen, yes, I want to continue with this, got that good rapport with the children, I want to carry on with it. So I have to say my own experiences of only seeing within the school where I work a lot of enthusiasm for it, but that's been built up by having a culture where it's okay to ask, it's okay to make mistakes. You've got people, I mean, day and night people were emailing each other saying, or rather when we got onto Teams, in Teams groups saying, how do you do this? And there was no embarrassment about it at all.
It comes back to this sort of MFL Twitterati kind of philosophy of we're in it together, it's culture more than it is individuals. Would that be right, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but nail on the head. Absolutely, yeah.
But at a school level, it needs to be there as well, because that's where you're being accountable for what you're doing. So, you need to have your managers approving, if you like, the playing you're doing, the sorting out, the trying out.
Well, as a staff, going through this period, we've never been closer. We've never learnt more from each other than we have in this time frame.
That's really interesting, isn't it? You've probably never been further apart for so long, and yet...
At the same time, it's funny enough as well, the amount of meetings we've had. Before we used to have like a one meeting, MFL meeting, or as a staff, like a briefing, and suddenly we've been having extra meetings. It's added more work, but at the same time, they've been informal meetings and meetings with other people to learn from each other. And I think that's something very positive.
And something that I was reading recently was about asynchronous meetings, where people can't always coordinate together at the same time. And whether actually you've got little tools, like little video capture tools, where you can record a short video, send it out and ask for people's responses. Do you see the potential for that type of approach? Because the bit it also went into was this notion that when someone does that, people have got time to think and reflect before they then give a response.
This is fine enough. We learned so much. We never used to do that before. We used to have the meeting, physical meeting. They were taking notes and that's it, the minutes, and that used to go away. And then obviously now, because we're using Teams, then everything gets recorded. You open a chat and you have different channels. People reflect on it, come back to it. Easy to share resources. You get things online all the time. Then you can open this at the same time OneNote for the whole MFL meeting. So the whole idea of sharing good practice, not just it's just there all the time. And I think that's very, very, very powerful. And we've decided, in fact, as a department, that as from September, we're going to have, of course, if we come back to normal, have the normal physical meetings, but we're going to use Teams as a way of sharing the information. And in fact, all our resources now are on Teams.
Well, yeah, it's a way, because we had Teams for 3 years or so before, well, up till this point, we've done that. We've had virtual meetings. We've had a situation where people with their digital pens, you know, in the OneNote, but we've been adding our little bits, or people tend to use a different color, and we'll type in whatever, or we're in a team, we'll share. We work in year groups, so if we're all teaching year 9, for example, there'll be a team for that, and we share ideas in that way. And you know, we have these asynchronous chats, if you like.
It kind of brings me on to the tools part of it, kind of what we've got here. You know, what are the tools that you've used to meet the curriculum and assessment objectives at your school? That's quite a formal question, but I suppose I'm coming from the point of view that what I've seen is a lot of delivery, and then some people get students interacting with each other, and there's a lot more formative assessments, kind of ongoing assessment. But a lot of people have almost gone back into delivery mode. So I'm going to deliver this content to you. And as long as I get that over, it's a bit like when we used to worry about making sure we've got marks in our books, because then we need to show somebody, look what I've done, kind of thing. So, you know, there's a mixed picture, but how do you see either tools or approaches to formative, summative assessment that have worked?
So obviously we need to recognise the fact that the national picture is, you know, each context, each school is different, and some schools will have access to lots of technology and can do synchronous live lessons, and some schools absolutely can't, because it might be, for example, that in the household that there might be, you know, 3-4 children, and the only device they have is a mobile phone when they're using their own data, or that they have the one laptop that the parents are using, let's say if they're working from home. And so the idea of asynchronous learning is incredibly important, and it's been interesting that lots of people have been asking about, you know, for formative assessment, things like, you know, the fact that Quizlet have now made it possible to do the Quizlet live with just 2 people independently, and then you've got you know, GimKit assignments, you've got Kahoot assignments. So in other words, you can have that asynchronous formative assessment, but everything is then exported to an Excel spreadsheet, so we've got the evidence of what they're doing. So that's been really interesting.
Yes, as examples, you've given 2 or 3 there. Could you just tell us what they do?
Right. Okay. So out of all the formative assessment tools, probably my favourite, and I think probably people in the chat will agree as well, is Quizizz. I know Jane, for example, and Esmeralda are big fans of Quizizz. So Quizizz is Quizizz, and it's very similar to Kahoot, which probably everybody on the world knows about, I would imagine, certainly in the language teaching world. But what Quizizz does in a different way is it has more exercise types. I love the audio question opportunity, so it means you can do remote listening practice, which is awesome with the teacher's voice, and the fact that everything is it goes into an Excel spreadsheet. So I think Quizizz is probably my top tip for a free formative assessment tool, followed by Quizlet, which again lots of language teachers know from around the world, Kahoot. And then also just like something more simple, like a Google form or a Microsoft form, really nice for exit tickets or ongoing formative assessment. So so tools which can be used asynchronously as well as synchronously, I think is incredibly important. Although I have seen on Twitter quite a few people have been doing sort of plenaries in a live session with, say, quizzes or what have you, to sort of finish the lesson off with a bang. But I think that we have to recognize the fact that not everybody is, you know, in a school with a one-to-one system. Yeah, sure. Everyone is different, and everyone's tried to do their best in this situation. And
Helen, what I was going to ask you is that, you know, how do we look at these things as genuine teaching and learning tools rather than just kind of gimmicks, flash in the pan kind of things? You know, it's a tricky one, that, I think, because I like to play. I love to play with technology, and then I think, oh, is that the time? But how does, you know, how has that helped my students, kind of thing?
Well, I think in languages we don't have any problem at all in justifying playing.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Language lesson, and you see the way that it's through a game and through playing that students will compete with each other, compete with the teacher, and when it comes to the computer, compete with the computer. Sure. And it really doesn't matter what the topic is. It doesn't matter whether they see that this is going to have some sort of meaning in their life when they're in their working life, or, you know, at work. They like playing the game, and it's through playing the game that they will practice the skills. So certainly for a subject like ours, which is very skills based, although it's demanding a lot of cognitive work, obviously, with it as well. For us, the learning is tangible. If you go into a class, it's palpable. You go in and you think, I can actually see that the words that they didn't know at the beginning, they know at the end. They might not be necessarily themselves articulating that. They're just saying, oh, I won. I got so many points. But we can see that progress and we can see it going through. Brilliant. So I think certainly we just mustn't be scared at all of something which seems to be playful, and that's what computers can do. At the same time, I think that there are some areas where what we want to show is actually you can replicate what you'd normally do in the classroom online. And this is something which I learned an awful lot from Jane right at the start of our MFL Twitter Eye webinars. She was one of the first people who did a webinar really showing me, look, you can do what you normally do in classroom, but you can just organize it through being online. So for example, a typical lesson for me with a year 10 high ability French group who need to get through the course because we're going to be doing a GCSE in 2021. We are going through the course book. They've all got their own copy of the course book at home. And that to me has been an invaluable resource. They've got the course book, they've got access to the audio that goes with the course book. So for me, it can be a very, very simple, well, seems simple, but a simple exercise of just providing, and I know that both Esmeralda and Jane do this, you just have a OneNote document, Google Doc, whatever you use. You make it so that it's a template where you've already written the dating from, exercise 1, listen to this, here's the grid already, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, put in the answers, and then I allow a grid, a column where they can put their ticks. They like self-marking because you can get pretty little ticks and they can get things. So,
and I suppose, Jane, something that dawned on me as well is that although we get very hung up on formative and summative assessment, and there's been lots of talk about catch-up classes and that kind of stuff, I suppose it comes back also to the emotional well-being and the engagement and the motivation and such like. So I suppose that must be part of it, isn't it?
I mean, I'd always start my lessons when I haven't seen my students. Well, if I'm in front of the class, I'll start the lessons and we have a chat. That's how it always is. I want to know how they're feeling emotionally. I want to make sure everyone's in the right place. And I do the same online, right? Give me in the chat, give me an emoji that sums up best how you're feeling today, or I use there's a little sort of poll feature in Microsoft, and I'll set a little question, which would be, how it has the opportunity to, are you 5 sunshines or just 1 sunshine today? I just give my students that opportunity to show how they're feeling. That emotional side of things is really important, I think. And then to think about going back to something that Helen said, in terms of assessing the pupils and self-marking, that's one of the things that I think makes them feel good, is if they know that they're learning. So you can set them activities where they can do things again and again, and they can see that they're learning. And for me as the teacher, all I ask is that at the end of the process, once they've learned and they've got it as much right as possible, I'll ask them to screenshot their work and paste it in, and I can see it. And then they've got that great feeling. I've got this right. I'm learning something. I know where they are.
If I step in what Jane has said as well, which is very important as well, and also what Helen was saying, is the immediate feedback as well. Some of the tools, even if you're working asynchronously, it doesn't really matter, because you have access to, for example, you're using a platform such as OneNote, or even with Quizizz, you get this stuff straight away. You can mark it, you can give audio feedback straight away. So that kind of link between the teacher and the student doesn't get lost. And for that, you don't need to have a live lesson, as long as you have access to the work, and the students have access to the work at some point during the day. Gotcha. So yes, because I know, as Joe was saying, some households still got 1 computer. So that kind of the kids knowing that you're going to look at the work that night or during the week, then you usually be like a Bitmoji. You usually be like, well done, and you give extremely clear feedback with audio. Suddenly they feel up to it, feel positive, and they want to carry on and doing more. So it's all part of the same kind of structure, and for that you need to have a very good structured lesson. So what you were saying at the beginning, it's not about gimmicks, because it's good. There is a purpose in that, and then at the same time you're having fun. You make the lesson memorable.
This notion, Jane, I've got here that you mentioned about that it could be quite exhausting to do synchronous stuff for lengthy periods of time, like a whole term. Because let's focus on Joe for a second. Joe, you spend a lot of time on the screen, talking to people, you're the podcast guy. But why is this stuff a apparently exhausting. Why isn't it easier? We're in the comfort of our own homes, for goodness sake, you know.
Well, in a Tilt webinar we had with Stefan Kasper, who was at Southampton University, is now over in the States. One of the things that he said towards the end was one of the reasons which why the teachers feel so tired after a live Zoom session or equivalent is the fact that they are constantly looking at different things happening on the screen. You're constantly looking at different webcams, and you're being so that's why one could argue that it's an exhausting experience. But I think just the whole multitasking element, the fact that you're in a classroom situation, the ability to go around and to check what everyone's doing, looking over people's shoulders literally, is easy. Whereas in this sort of situation, I mean, I know personally, having done online training, like not just like a webinar, but like a series of workshops, one of the frustrating things that I find is the fact you obviously can't look over people's shoulders, as it were, and then get an immediate picture of where people are at. Yeah. You have to sort of just pick that up from what they're saying, or maybe they can share their screen, which takes time. Something else which I found, which other people have said as well, that the amount of content you can cover in, say, an hour lesson would be, you could say do half the amount online. I don't know if anyone else has found that,
right,
but,
okay. But
I think those sorts of things can be exhausting because you've got what you want to cover, and then you have to constantly adapt it, which is you would in the face-to-face classroom. But I think there's that anxiety of trying to make sure that you're meeting everyone's needs and not having as clear a picture as you would when you're face-to-face with people and you see, I know you can see people with a webcam, but it's not the same thing.
And actually you say not the same thing. That's very interesting, because looking at you guys, you all look wonderful, by the way, but you're in 2 dimensions and it's pixels, not real color, and the sound's compressed, and the sound is good, but it's compressed. And I suppose all of these things are new to the brain. So even if I can hear you, my brain's probably thinking that it's not real audio, and having to adapt to that. So maybe over time it will get easier and better for young people and for teachers to, and perhaps less tiring. Perhaps people will become more resilient and more adaptable if and as the need arises. And actually that leads me on to my next question, because this one is a bit of a boring one, I'm afraid. It's about kind of GDPR and safety and that kind of stuff, because all of that side of it is what scares people, I think. Certainly I've had that feedback is, I know a few schools who just have not done synchronous lessons because they're petrified of safeguarding. So Helen, I mean, do you have some ideas around perhaps giving some confidence to people in that kind of context?
Well, I think from a teacher level, the important thing obviously is making sure that you're complying with whatever your managers agree with, because I think a very important part, and it's something which we're conscious of, is that you don't say to someone, "Oh, go and try this," without having checked things already.
Sure.
Now, I think that again is the responsibility of the management team to be able to say to people, "This is our platform. This is what we allow. If there's anything that you'd like to use that you're not sure about, get in touch with us and find out." Because sometimes it can be as simple as making sure that if it's a different, actually, if I can start again, the fact that we have a common platform, I think, is really, really important. And again, I know that from, learning from Jane and Esmeralda and others, that idea about having a common platform, we've happened to go, all 3 of us, I think, have gone for Microsoft. Others people have gone for Google. That gives you a security straight away, because you know that any of your interactions can be seen by your manager. And I suppose that's my feeling, as long as whatever I'm doing can be seen by my manager. And so schools will then come up with what they agree with as being okay. Sure. And that's been the same even before this situation. I mean, we felt that with tools, that there have been some things which have popped up which are really exciting. As soon as it says that the child has to give their own email, then you say, well, no, we can't do that. Yeah,
that's interesting, because there is one absolutely brilliant synchronous classroom teaching system, which I won't actually name, because this is not a negative thing as such, because they wouldn't necessarily culturally have the same thing, but you have to use your phone number to access it. And I was trying to explain to them, and they've got millions of users worldwide, but they tend to be in the Asian countries where it would seem to be okay for that to happen, but they couldn't necessarily understand why there might be a security issue with that. So I suppose there is sometimes, Joe, there is sometimes times where we put trust in the technology and the platform. As we go forwards and create something more embedded and sustainable, do you feel that there's a management need to be a little bit more scrutinous at times?
Well, I would always recommend that any teacher wanting to try out a new tool always checks the terms and conditions, the privacy, check whether it's GDPR compliant, contact them on Twitter if you're not clear, send them an email if need be. And as Helen has said, which I agree with 100%, check with the person in charge of the network, check with your line manager about the idea of using a certain tool, and check that it's okay. So and so from that point of view, I would never encourage people to to not check first, but at the same time I would encourage people to have a play, which is a sort of like a theme running through all of this as well. So I think that I think that's really, really important. I think that sticking to compliance is incredibly important, but I think at the same time it's important to encourage people to experiment with different ideas and try things out. And by looking on Twitter and elsewhere, you can get lots of amazing examples of how people are using tools, and then that can open your eyes to how they can be used. But always check the small print and whether they are compliant. And if you're not sure, contact the company and ask them. That's what I would suggest.
Sure. And thank you. And I know it's one of those sort of gritty subjects that needs to be tackled. And I have to say, I come from most of my background for the last sort of 15 years is working with China and Chinese schools and Chinese teachers. And my experience of their ability to use asynchronous and synchronous learning, it's much more embedded than it is here. So when I was talking to my Chinese friends and colleagues, they were saying, "Oh, Rob, I've got to go because I've got to go and deliver a lesson." And that was just very commonplace. Or someone would say, "I'm exhausted. I've been teaching all day." And that was I'd say it's a normal transition. And their perception is that it isn't as good, if you like, as the face-to-face, but it has its place. I think very similar to us. But I mean, Joe, with your sort of worldwide head on as well, do we feel that other countries or other areas are a little bit ahead of us culturally in the way they approach blended learning and this sort of online learning?
Well,
or am I barking up the wrong tree with that?
No, I think there are pockets of excellence everywhere,
sure,
all around the world. So you have some schools who are doing amazing things. You have obviously teachers who are doing amazing things. And what's been incredible over many, many years through social media is to try to connect those pockets of best practice, so that everyone can learn from everybody else, which is fantastic. But I also, what you just said, it made me think as well about the idea that, and I don't know if anyone agrees with this, but the idea that some students possibly have felt that they've actually preferred the learning style of being independent learning online, rather than the face-to-face. And I think that's something which is worth discussing as well. But that's what one of my jobs I have felt is in the languages world is to try to connect these pockets of excellence together. And one of the lovely things about the webinars we've been putting on is the fact that I have been sort of drawing on these connections and asking people from Australia, from the States, if they'd be willing to share their practice. And I think everyone's benefited because everyone has seen, what their life has been like in their context and applying it to our own context, which has been lovely.
Looking at a hopeful future, just to kind of to wrap up, but looking at a hopeful future, positive future, we've learned a lot of cool stuff, if you like, and we've made some mistakes and such like, but I believe there's a hopeful future in this approach to learning. What's your favorite kind of thing? It doesn't have to be a tool. It could be the thing that you've done with a student, or it might be a piece of learning method, or something that you're kind of going, "Oh wow, that worked, that was exciting, that was good, my students engaged." That buzz you get when you get a really good lesson right. Has anyone got any examples? I'm sure you're all going to go piling in with the answer to this. But Esmeralda, do you have anything that's that you could share?
Yes, I do have some of my favorites. My absolute favorite, and I think that we're going to implement it as from September, is the use of OneNote. That is going to be a must. We are going to carry on now having physical exercise books with OneNote, which is basically OneNote is an online exercise book, basically. Sure. And together paired with that, we're also going to keep using videos and screen casting. That's been extremely successful. We were the only department in MFL that we use in the screencasting videos. Most of our departments, although in my school, although we're using Teams and OneNote, that we're using live lessons, and the kids found that really tiring. They love the fact they had a video they can use anytime. The video was basically, we used Loom, but we could use screencasting as well. And it's basically screencasting what you would do in a normal lesson, so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. And during the lesson, during the lockdown, it worked fantastically well, because I would do repetition, a little bit of flashcards, everything I would do in a normal lesson, but the kids could obviously stop, they could carry on doing, they would, repeating after me, recording their own version. And the way I can see that can move forward would be to carry on the screencast as well for homework tasks. So more of creating a video where you repeat after me. Brilliant. You have a video where you need to do a dictation. Normally homework tasks in the past has been more like worksheets or learning. Yeah. And you may have every so often a little bit more interactive with a Padlet, with Quizizz, with Quizlet, and we thought that is using OneNote and the videos as prep, and what I mean prep, homework tasks, is a very powerful tool.
Is that online? Can anyone sort of find examples like that? Where should they, Joe, I will ask you for everyone's example quickly, but just while I remember here, call to action, where can people go now? Do they type just MFL Twitterati, or should we be sending them to individual blogs or a particular place on the net?
Esmeralda has very kindly put together a Padlet, which has been going for a month, 2 months now, I think, and it's been populated by many outcomes that have been produced as a result, I think, of the webinars we've been doing. So, for example, escape rooms, there's been a real interest in escape rooms, which has been great, because I think that teachers like to keep busy, and they've had maybe some more time to be creative in this way. And so it's been really lovely to see the community coming together and populating the Padlet with different ideas. So that would be a great point. And then, the first point would just be to follow the hashtag, do the 10-minute challenge, as I talk about, sort of like have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee, 10-minute challenge. In those 10 minutes, you're going to find a gem every single time you do it, I'm sure. Or use the hashtag MFL Twitterati plus a keyword like speaking or grammar or listening, and then you'll find something amazing, because everything is archived over many years. Brilliant.
I'm gonna steal that 10-minute challenge thing. And then I'm gonna pass it off as my own, of course. No, I'll say it's Joe Dale's. Anyway, Jane, would you like to share something?
Yeah, I mean, I can only agree with Esmeralda really about OneNote. OneNote has been a fantastic tool, and to be able to give that immediate feedback, to enable my students to progress, to ask them questions, as they're doing the work. I've found that incredibly powerful. And everything about OneNote, there's so much in it. So, getting them to, for example, I love this little thing. I get them to read a sentence that's in French, and using the dictation tool, and if their pronunciation is off, it can't spell it correctly.
Right,
so
okay.
They can compare and see how they're doing. And they love that. That's an activity the students love. And then the other thing I use, which I've really enjoyed using, and I'm going to carry on using, is Flipgrid. And I used it before as well, for students to do speaking activities. So they feel speaking is always can be a big thing in languages, because speaking foreign languages is tricky and they can have anxiety. So being able to use Flipgrid, where they can, set a picture, draw.
Did you say?
Flipgrid.
Flipgrid.
Yeah, it's an excellent tool. But used for all subjects, I think. I know that a lot of, having shared it within my school, I know a lot of departments used it. Some people used it really simply to introduce themselves to their new classes that they were taking, and to get the students to give them some little introductions as well. But the other way I've used Flipgrid is, so I don't do what Esmeralda does and record my lessons in that way, but what I do is I'll record the really significant bits, an important grammar bit or an important bit about the content, so they can watch it again and again. And I do that in Flipgrid, and I can embed that into OneNote.
Sure. And
that's something that I'll definitely take forward. And I know it's something that the students like, because they can access it at any time.
And actually, you mentioned, this is another little curveball here, off-piste, Google Translate. Okay, so I hear, I mean, I use it in not in China as such, you can't get Google in China, but I use some of the offline stuff, and I use the WeChat translator in China. But it's really useful for people like me. But what is the place for it in the languages department? Because sometimes I hear binary arguments about, we couldn't possibly use Google Translate, and other people say that it has its place. What do you think? Who would like to jump in on that one? Helen.
I've got the unpopular view, I know. I think it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Right,
I can remember when Google first came up, yes, people were right to be suspicious. It came out with ridiculous things. If you put in accurate English, you get outstanding French. I'm talking certainly from the French point of view.
Right.
German as well. I find it is really, really good. It's something that, and the second thing really is that it's something people will use. So there's no point teachers saying, oh, we want to make it so they can't use it, or tell them not to use it. We've got to train them how to use it. Sure. And actually, it was in discussion once with, I think, Jane, we were working on something, and I was showing Jane what I do to, there's a separate issue for language teachers, is that something we really miss in the classroom is that when you do a listening at work with them, afterwards you normally show them the transcript and you tell them what all the words meant. Well, you can't do that when you're at a distance, supposedly. But what I've done is I've just taken a copy of the transcript. I put that transcript, that French transcript, into Google, and I get a practically perfect English translation. Wow. So it's reduced my work.
It's getting better and better, isn't it? The more the more data it has, the more it learns.
And I've gone further than that now, is that I show the children, here is what the original was, here's what Google said it was, and I highlight where I had to change it.
Right,
They can see that. And then Jane said to me, well, you could make that into an exercise. You could give them, this is what it was, this is what Google says, you spot the differences. So I'm going to do that now, Jane. So
good. I mean, I was always anti. I can see that it's a really useful tool for me, when I want to look something up, because I understand how the language works. But for my students, I was always worried. But having spoken to Helen, I concur, and it's something that I've used as well now. Where are the mistakes? Are there any mistakes? It just encourages them to think and to engage with the language.
Yeah. Helen, I'm going to take that as your big positive, your big favourite. But I saw your finger go up, so let's have another one, because the more the merrier.
Just on the Google, almost, because any language teachers watching this, there'll be quite a few who will be shocked by this. Yeah. Just to say that I think it was Sandra who gave us an idea, Sandra Aktash, whereby if you want to force them not to use Google, which is what we want. I mean, having said that, I do still say do not use Google when I want to see whether or not they've learned what I want them to learn, because in the exam they won't have Google. So we do need a situation where they don't use it. And the way around it is to say, now I want you to write an account of your holiday. Well, it won't be holiday now, will it? It'll be an account of your last weekend. These are the words you must include.
Sure.
And that forces them then to use those words rather than just randomly writing whatever they want to do.
Nice. So, brilliant. Okay, thank you.
I would like to just say on the my favourite bit, really.
Oh yeah, go on.
Because we have sort of said, yes, we know that not everybody can do synchronous, and you can get around that. For me, though, I do love doing the synchronous when I can.
Yeah.
And I'm in a nice position in that I do an after-school class with just 9 students anyway in real life. Mm-hmm. And I've carried on doing that, and they've all been turning up. All 9 have been coming in their own time. It was optional. It didn't have to come.
That's great.
And I've loved it. And I've loved being able to prove that, yes, we do need to teach people to describe their bedroom. We do need to teach people to describe their pets, because that's what they've done. They've brought their pets in.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've explained their room. I've loved it.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, if I were to put my perspective forward, I truly believe that in the classroom, the relationship between the student the students and each other, and the student and the teacher, is really, really paramount. And often that is personality driven, whether we like that or not. That's my belief. But it doesn't have to be. And I think a lot of these tools have helped for some teachers to drive much stronger relationships, where they may have struggled in the classroom context, whether it's from behaviour or classroom management and such like. But equally, for me, I think it's this notion of encouraging people to just relax and use their personality with the synchronous stuff, through the camera. It's just like, you're only there, aren't you, really? And whereas sometimes I think people feel that they have to be quite different. They have to act different. But actually, I think you can get a lot of you across in the, and something I've noticed, this is going to be my little bit, and then I'm going to ask Joe to wrap up, really, with some wise words and his favourite thing. Something I'm drawing from a lot is how young people engage with YouTube YouTubers, and the way they edit their stuff, their videos, and they often have very obvious cuts. So, whereas what happens for me is that if I watch myself back, I'll think I want to chop that bit, and that's much more palatable, perhaps for a student in the online context. And if you look at some of the YouTube influencers, it's literally they'll say something and you'll see the cut, but they don't hide it. And I feel perhaps sometimes we may need to draw from that type of approach, a bit more involved, but for me, I think, well, what does my 16 and 19-year-old son engage with when it's online? It's rapid. And so perhaps there's something to explore there. That's all I was going to kind of bring to the table. But Joe, can I ask you to, your favourite or your most exciting, your most hopeful thing, and just a few wise words for everybody, really, just to wrap up?
Yeah, that's fine. So a couple of things that come to mind. I mean, I think everyone is trying their best in their own context. I think that's really important. And the support that we've all tried to give everybody, I think, has been very well received. So that's lovely. One of the things which has touched me is the way in which people on the language teachers on Twitter have been saying that they have enjoyed the feedback they've been getting from their students by the fact that they've been doing screencasts or being able to record audio into a PowerPoint, like simple things which maybe they'd never thought of doing before, but they've done that, and the children have really enjoyed hearing their teacher's voice. So very sort of like simple things, that simple human connection has been something which has warmed my heart, I think. And then in relation to tools which I've seen prove very popular, or ones that I think are really nice, whiteboard.fi has gone down really well in the sense that teachers who normally would do mini whiteboards in a face-to-face lesson have been able to use whiteboard.fi to replicate that, and that's gone down really nicely. I'm a big fan of the quicker conversations as well. So quicker is QWIQR conversations, a bit like Flipgrid but audio only, and I know that you can have audio only with Flipgrid if you have the image over the top as well. But quicker was created by a physics teacher. It is GDPR compliant. All the information is stored either on UK servers or EU servers, and what's nice about that from a speaking point of view, particularly with the current constraints around speaking in languages, which is clearly a big issue to stopping the spread of the virus, is the idea of being able to record audio asynchronously. So you create your audio message, you give the link to the students, they can then record their answers, and you can use that for sort of back and forth dialogues or for speaking practice with feedback. But those are two things which I have certainly come up on my radar, and also just because I'm of doing my podcast, which we're trying to get up and running again, and we've done a couple of interviews recently, and just talking to language teachers about their thoughts and their reflections on their practice is a real privilege. So that's been my highlights. We've recorded a few interviews recently, so I'm hoping this month or certainly next month we'll be able to start putting out some new episodes as well. So that's something which really gets me excited as well. But just as I said earlier, just being able to connect with language teachers from all over the world through webinars, through social media, understanding everyone's context has been one of the highlights. And also just searching through Twitter for the names of different tools and hashtags, and just seeing what people are doing and seeing how people are using different tools in different contexts. It's been a very rich experience from that point of view, even though, we've all been involved in this for many years, but actually to see now how the examples, there are many more examples of how people are using it, because everyone has to use the technology. And that's been fascinating. And
your last piece of advice, Joe, just for people to just, what's going to stick in their brain when they come away from watching this?
Take a deep breath, keep it simple, choose a number of different tools, choose the platform and work out how to use the platform as best that you can. Watch the webinars. We can share the link to my YouTube channel, JoeDale100. You can watch, we've got 40 webinar recordings there. Pick the things that you particularly jump at you, and ask for help if need be. That's what I would say. We're all in this together. It's not about individuals feeling isolated. We're all in this together, and we're here to help, and we're happy to help.
Fantastic. And I just can't thank you enough. It's just, I've learned loads. I was a PE teacher. I'm a kind of a geeky, techie kind of PE teacher, but for me to have this kind of engagement with MFL teachers. I actually don't think I've ever had that at this level of depth, so I really appreciate it. Jane, Esmeralda, Helen and Joe, thank you so much, and I hope we can do this again sometime. Take care for now.
Thank you.
Take care. Later.